Well, it's time for me to cover another update in Toolpath. But for this one, I want to start by pausing for a minute and explaining where you'll see our focus over the next 4 months or so. Leading up to IMTS, we really went into IMTS with three very key goals and objectives. We wanted to be able to show the industry, you watching the video, that AI for CNC is inevitable, but that Toolpath is taking a pragmatic approach. There's some real pragmatic things we can do to apply AI and machine learning to the process of machining parts. And finally, we wanted people to leave feeling that they owed it to themselves to upload their parts into Toolpath and experience what the future of CNC machining might look like. So as we prioritized features leading up into IMTS, it was really about showing the end-to-end workflow. That left us in a situation where there's still many cases where we might refer to them as paper cuts and even some showstoppers in the workflow that now we need to begin to prioritize. So for the next few months, as I'm giving you updates, keep an eye on the details we're focused on. That's really our goal, to get those details right as you begin to upload your own parts into the system and experience the value we're working on. The first one is fairly simple, but let's just make sure you have samples that get you to explore what we have in a meaningful way before you put your own parts in. And so this sample on my screen is one of the new samples we've added. It's a realistic, feature-rich part for you to identify how the system might work. Now in this case, I'm using a large library with many tools, and you can see the system's chosen 31 tools to machine the part. We've also added a sample of a smaller library with less tools in it so that you can see that the DFM process that we're doing is far more than a simple DFM process to say is the part machinable. That becomes the result. But the only reason what we're going to say a part's not machinable is not because of some generalized DFM, but because there's not a tool in your library capable of making that part. So it appears to be very DFM-like, but that's simply a byproduct of your tool library not being able to machine the entire part. And we want you to be able to experience the value of having specific libraries, and so you now have multiple tool libraries that you can use and cutting configs that you can use to work through that. So the next thing that I think is fairly important, I don't think it's fairly important, it's actually critical, even though it seems trivial. All of us have a muscle memory on how we interact with 3D geometry, and each of the products we come from have unique ways that we interact with 3D geometry. And we've done the work to make sure that Toolpath can be set up to act the way you expect it to act. So as you're using the system, you're not having to learn a new way of manipulating a 3D model. And we hope that this helps remove some of the obstacles for experiencing the value here. And so you can go to your preferences, the same place where you set your tolerances and preferences on stock, and you can go there and set your preferences on how to interact with the 3D model. Okay, while we're talking about interacting with the 3D model, up until now, there wasn't a correlation between the parameters and the UI, the graphics area. The graphics area was just a place we displayed information. We can now begin to select geometry in the graphics area to see some information about it. In this case, I've selected a key seat, and you may have noticed with that other library that didn't have a key seat cutter, that was an unmachinable surface. Now it's a machinable surface with a T-slot cutter. We can see the T-slot cutter that's being used and the setup that it's being machined in. So again, another detail that helps you interact with the model. You likely already saw the operation tab or the strategy tab, where we show the detailed information about how the machining's going. That was done just before IMTS, but you'll see us continue to refine this and consolidate the number of operations needed to machine a part. The last little detail that matters to the people outside of the US, and we heard this a lot from our users outside of the US, is a desire to have their currencies. And so if I go to my estimating presets and edit the preset, This is where we're setting the base costs and the costs per setup and the cost per runtime. We've added the ability to add the currency type for your region. And again, this is one of those details that wasn't fundamental to the calculation, but important detail for you to be able to use the product in your local currency. So again, I hope that's a help. So those are some of the user experience things, detailed, and that's what you should expect over the coming months is dotting a lot of I's and crossing a lot of T's on the details. We'll think of these as paper cuts. Now there are some showstoppers too that cause some issues in identifying parts as being unmachinable. And in this case, we can see an area where to machine this flat surface, a machinist knows they would extend past that surface. And while the way we've been training the system was to minimize the amount of tool changes, minimize the amount of runtime, minimize the number of setups, in the past, it would avoid machining the same surface twice, but there's an overlapping area when you machine that's naturally going to have to be machined twice. So if I select this other area, these corner spots need to be machined twice. And that was something that in the past just tied the system in a bit of a knot, and we've untangled its ability to reason with those particular situations. And so this is a case where more parts are going to be machinable as you would expect them to be machinable looking at it through the lens of a machinist. And so there'll be a lot of those situations that the system may have failed on in the past, and we'll be working through them. Specifically, keep an eye out in the future for how we handle 3D surfaces. The last piece I'm going to cover today is tool roles. I'll try and explain tool roles a little bit as well, though. So I'm going to go into the cutting configs, and in the cutting configs, this is where you map the tool to the role. And the role is very important. And to describe it in this way, the system looks and says, what's the geometry of a tool that needs to machine a surface? And the first thing it's actually doing is we call it the terminal tool. What is the smallest tool, the final tool that's required? If a pocket has a 1/4 inch radius, we know that we need a 1/2 inch tool to finish that pocket. But if it's a very large pocket, we may later inject in a larger tool to rough it out for speed reasons. But suffice it to say that the first thing the system does is say, what's the tool geometry that needs to fit? But we also need to make sure that tool geometry, that tool itself, is allowed to machine some of that geometry. So as an example, you might have a 2-inch face mill and a 2-inch hole. Well, that tool geometrically could drill a hole, but the tool does not have a acceptable roll to do drilling. And so this is where the rolls is very important. The other aspect of rolls, so a tool needs to have a roll, and then each of the rolls are different ways you might use the tool. When I'm finish cutting with a 1/2 inch end mill versus adaptive roughing or traditional roughing, I'm going to use the tool with different speeds, feeds, parameters. And so we've made sure we've cleaned that up to have the adaptive style roughing roll versus the traditional style roughing roll, because you're going to use the tool with different parameters. Even though it's the same physical tool with the same geometry, you may not want to use a tool in some rolls, so you wouldn't have that roll. And in those different instances, you'll use different cutting parameters. So we've worked to set this foundation. Our team still is doing a lot of the work for users to make sure that their libraries are built well. But another place you can look in the future to us putting effort in is really the ability to make it easier for you as an end user to build out your libraries and guide the system the way you want to. And largely the tools you have and how you like to use those tools is one of the primary ways today that you do the prompt engineering. You guide the system into thinking the way you think using these tools. So you'll see a lot of work from us on helping you set up your libraries. Well, that's the update for today, but also gives you directional intent of what to expect in the updates over the coming months. Thanks for following along, and we hope to have you as a user. Cheers.